Please go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I, Nirupma Sharma, on behalf of SOCHAM, welcome all the attendees for this webinar series. As we all know that today we are celebrating World Food Safety Day. The World Food Safety Day is being celebrated today, and the theme of this year is Food Safety, Everyone's Business. This stresses upon the action-oriented approach that will promote the global food safety awareness, and the role of all countries is important for us. All the stakeholders, decision makers, private sector players, civil society, UN organization, and including general public have to play an important role in ensuring the food safety across the sectors. Against this backdrop, to take this forward, SOCHAM is organizing this webinar series basically to educate students and MSME. And to initiate it, we have our expert, Ms. Rapta Rastogi, who has around 20 years of experience of Indian food industry. She has an experience in quick service restaurant, confectionery, processed foods and fruits and vegetables, flavor houses, DFRL, instrumentation, and FSMS. So I welcome Ms. Rapta Rastogi to this webinar series, who will be sharing her views, insights on on important topics. So over to you, Ms. Rapta. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Wish you all a World Food Safety Day. And thanks, Rupma, for this brief introduction. Just hold on. Yeah. So, am I audible to everyone?
Ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. You are audible, ma'am.
So, wish you all a second World Food Safety Day, whose basic objective is to draw attention and inspire action to prevent, detect, and manage the foodborne risk, contributing to the food security, human health, economic prosperity, agriculture, market access, tourism, and sustainable development. So, as the objective says, it's a food safety, everyone's business. So, how this is going to be the everyone's business? From the farm to the fork, through the complete food chain. It is everyone who is getting involved into this food chain. So this is the responsibility of everyone, including the government, to ensure its safe use by making the regulations. It's a responsibility of the agricultural and the food producers to grow it safe by adopting good practices. It's a responsibility of the business operators to keep it safe, to make the food safe under the safe environment. It's again the responsibility of all consumers to eat it safe. They have the right to safe, healthy, and nutritious food. Last but not the least, this is a team's work. So everyone has to come up. They have to integrate to have the safe food. I would request to play a small video from the FAO WHO on the World Food Safety Day. As a CHAM team, could you please help to run that video?
Okay, ma'am.
Yes, it's happening.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, team. So on the second World Food Safety Day, we are going to start our session on introduction to the food safety acts, safety standards and act. We just go to the presenters mode. Today we would be covering these contents in our today's discussion. That is the introduction to the FSSAI Act rules and regulations, definition of the food safety. We would discuss about the horizontal standards, what are the vertical standards, and how we do the formula compliance. The first thing is why we wanted to study these FSSAI Act rules and regulations, and why this is important for us. So as like this session is meant specifically for the students, so they are going to pursue their careers in the R&D, into the quality, into the regulatory or laboratory, or any aspect of the food, right? So this food safety standards and act, this is the Bible for us. And we need to know that why it came into existence, how it is made up of, how it is governed, and what food categories they fall under that, how they are working. So the first question is like, why it came into existence. So prior to the FSSA Act rules and regulations, so there were 9 different laws from 8 different ministries who were governing the food sector. So all these laws framed by the different ministries or departments were having the different perspective and enforcement approach. So there was the overlapping laws with different quality standards and labeling requirements. So in nutshell, there was a multiplicity in these regulations. These regulations were fragmented and there was a lack of uniformity in the approach. As a result, there was varied quality and safety standards with a different degree of rigidness. There was poor information dissemination at the consumer level as well. So you can just imagine a situation where an food business is there. They are manufacturing a very simple product like jam, but the jam, it is governed by 2 or 3 departments. One was the BFA, another was the food products order, and third is the legal metrology department. And these, the laws were different under these 3 different departments. If it is compliant to one and non-compliant to another, the food business owner cannot run that business. So you can just imagine the mess before this FSSA Act rules and regulations. In 2002, the central government, they just felt that we need to have a single rules for one nation. So they gave this responsibility to the Ministry of Food Processing Industries to consolidate the various acts and orders governing the food. As a result, in 2006, MOFPI came up with the FSSA Act. After receiving the consent of the president, this act was enacted, and after various consultations and deliberations with various stakeholders and a series of discussion within the interministerial groups taken place, and at last this responsibility to enact this act was given to Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So what was the result of this thing? From a multiplicity kind of a thing, we moved to a single line of control. So there was a shift from multi-level to a single level, whose main focus was on the self-compliances by the FBOs, and main objective to ensure the safe and wholesome food throughout the food chain. Though the act was enacted in 2006, but its rules and regulations, they were enacted in 2011. So in nutshell, the new law removes the multiplicity of the regulation, harmonized with the international law, framing regulatory requirements based on the science and risk analysis, facilitating the trade without compromising consumer safety, and bringing in innovation in the foods. So this was the picture before the FSSAI Act. So these were the various orders, regulations under the different ministries. Here you can see the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act, PFA, which was enforced in 1954. This was under the Department of Health of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Another was a fruit products order, which was again under the Ministry of Food Processing Industries. Milk and milk products were governed by the Department of Animal Husbandry under the Ministry of Agriculture. Exports, these were governed by the Export Quality Control Inspection Act under the Department of Commerce, Ministry of Commerce and Industries. Meat products orders, these were governed by the meat product order under the Ministry of Food Processing Industries. Agriculture produce for grading and marketing were governed by Department of Agriculture and Cooperation under the Ministry of Agriculture. So Ministry of Consumer Affairs, Food and Public Distribution, they were controlling all these regulations, which were regarding the standards of weights and measures, regarding your net weight and price control kind of a thing. And they had a few oil orders as well, like vegetable oil products control order, edible oil packaging regulations order, the solvent extracted oil, de-oiled meal and edible flour control order. So this was the picture before the enactment of the FSSAI Act rules and regulations. Yeah. So after this FSSAI Act came into existence, all these previous prevailing orders were repealed and this FSSAI Act came into existence. So what were the mandates of the FSSAI when it came into existence? Actually, the FSSAI main objective was to carry out the scientific risk assessment and setting of the standards basis the latest developments in food science, including the emergence of new additives or change in the processing technologies, basis the identification of new risk associated with the food in respect of contaminants, toxins, food consumption patterns, etc. So they had laid down these 9 principles on which this FSSAI works. The first and the foremost was the framing of the regulations, right? All these product standards. So this is the responsibility of the FSSAI. The next mandate was to lay down the mechanism and guidelines for the accreditation of certification bodies. So certification bodies, we have various food safety management systems in place or in the market, like ISO 22000, FSSC 22000, ISO 9001, 2008 is there, and every, I think, 1 year or 2 year, new systems are coming up or getting upgraded. So these needs to be, centrally controlled, or some guideline should be there. So FSSAI had, laid down the guidelines for the certification of such bodies. They have defined the scope also for those. The another mandate was to lay down the procedures and guidelines for the accreditation of the laboratories and notifications of the accredited laboratories. So in India, we know that the samples getting picked up by the FSOs and they send for the sampling to get the compliance against the standards. So the laboratories, it's not necessary that it's not under, means the FSSAI don't have that much of capacity that time, to make the labs everywhere in the India for the testing and compliance purposes. So they made some system for the accreditation of such laboratories. They had defined the scope of those laboratories, that kind of products could be tested, and for those products also what parameters are going to be tested. So this is the most happening kind of a regulation which is there in place, and you may get the updates, I think, after every 15 days or a month on the scope and accreditation of these laboratories. The another mandate is to provide the scientific advice and technical support to the central government and the state governments in the matters of framing the policies and rules. And whenever the central government, they ask some advice from the FSSAI, so they have to provide that technical advice to them. The recent example, in which we are living, the COVID-19, right? Everyone is quarantined, but the food businesses, they are working. So FSSAI, they had notified the guidelines for the food industry to work under this COVID-19 period. Similarly, there is a ongoing case on the single-use plastics, right? So the NGT, which is the National Green Tribunal in India. So this case was started in 2013. So after so many, like 5 or 6 years, so NGT, they constituted one body and they delegated this duty to the FSSAI to compile the comments, and they asked for the recommendations from the FSSAI to lay down the regulations on that. So the FSSAI played a nodal role in collating and compiling the recommendations for the NGT, and basis that means going forward some rules or regulations would be framed around that. So this kind of work is also done by the FSSAI. Next is it's a mandate to collect and collate data. Why they need to collect? Regarding the food consumptions, incidences and prevalence of the biological risk, contaminants in the food, residues of various contaminants in the food products, identification of the emerging risks, and introduction to the rapid alert system. So I can just share one more example on that, because obesity is the like on a high concern for India, and means there was some case also again going on in the court, and it is again a 9 or 10 years old case, and it is regarding the HFSS, the food high in fat, salt, and sugar. So until and unless the FSSAI is having some data on that, so they cannot frame the rules that how they can decide it under which food category, what should be the limiting criteria of the fat, salt, and sugar. So for such kind of work, for the emerging risk, so they have to collect and collate data basis that which helps them to frame the regulations. Next is creating an information network across the country so that the public, consumers, panchayats, etc., they receive the rapid, reliable, and objective information about the food safety and issues of concerns. So regarding this, to fulfill this mandate, they have developed various networks, and one is the InfoNet. It's there. So if you just go on the FSSAI website, you can go through all these initiatives by the FSSAI. Next is to provide the training programs for the persons who are involved or intend to get involved in the food businesses. So if someone want to start a new business, so FSSAI provides such kind of training programs to them. It is not only for the food business owner, it is basically for the food handlers who are handling the food. And for such programs, the one which is the most common these years is the fast track trainings for the food handlers. The next mandate is contribute to the development of international technical standards for food, sanitary, and phytosanitary standards. So India is the part of the Codex, and they represent the India for the development of these international technical standards. How these are useful? Because for the trade between these countries. The next, last but not the least, is to promote general awareness about the food safety and food standards. How the FSSAI works? In FSSAI, we have the Food Authority, which is chaired by the chairperson with the 22 members. So this, there are two further headings into that. One is the food standards, and another is the compliance and inspection. Under the food standards, we have the scientific committees, in which the chairperson of the scientific panels is the chairperson, and there are 6 independent members. Under this scientific committee, 17 scientific panels are there. So what's the function of these scientific committees and scientific panels? So we say that the FSSAI mandate is to develop the regulatory framework. They have to make the regulations for the food products. So they have categorized like the food into 17 categories, along with their packaging, labeling, contaminants, and various kinds of the food and food products like milk, fisheries, and confectionery, like that. So these scientific panel where, the eminent scientists of India are on the panel. So they develop the rules and regulations on need basis, or if there is any upgradation in the technology, R&D, or the industry, they wanted to have some amendment in the existing regulations. So all those comments, if they went to the scientific panel, they evaluate it, they deliberate it, and they send their recommendations to the scientific committee. So scientific committee bases the recommendations of the scientific panels, approves those recommendations, and then it goes to the draft stage where it is open to the key stakeholders for the comments. Then after receiving the comments, again these are discussed with the scientific panel and again vetted by the scientific committee, and finally it goes to the food authority for final gazette notification. So now when the rules and regulations are made, so that needs to be enacted. So that work is done by the compliance and the inspections committee. So under that we have the central advisory committee, which we call CAC, and under that we have the state level steering committees and district level advisory committees. So during the enforcement of these rules and regulations, what kind of issues are coming up, so that needs to be highlighted to the food authorities. So that is the work which falls under the compliance and the inspections. So FSSAI, it works through 12 divisions, which are standard division, regulation and codex division, regulatory compliance and surveillance, quality assurance and surveillance division, human resource, vigilance and training division, finance, imports, risk assessment and R&D division, FSMS division, general administration division, and legal division. So this is how like the FSSAI works through its various departments. Now come to our Bible, right? The FSSAI Act. So this is consisted of 12 chapters, 100 sections, and 2 schedules. So what does it cover? So as I said that this is the Bible. So it covers actually what should be the structure of the food authority, how this food authority would function. They have laid down the general provisions for the food, additives, contaminants. They have laid down the procedures for the regulations, like how the regulation would be finally gazetted, what would be the different stages, when it becomes gazetted, what are the offenses, and what would be the penalties against those offenses, what are the responsibilities of the authorities, the food business operators. So in nutshell, we can say this is the everyone's responsibility, not only the FSSAI. So they have incorporated all these things into the act. They have laid down like adjudication, budget. So all these things are being, laid down in this act. So there then comes the rules and the regulations. So basically rules and regulations, they draw their power, from this act. So act is the soul and rules and regulations are the branches of the trees. So in the rules we have 3 chapters and 10 rules. So rules basically they talk about the qualification and the duties of the FSSAI employees. It talks about the seizure of the samples and then procedure of the sampling, then how it would get tested, what would be the procedure for the appeal, like that. And there it comes like they have laid down some general rules for the FSSAI functioning, like their salaries, allowances, and other conditions of the service of the chairperson and members. So we can say like this system is very transparent, right? And in these rules, like they have 19 rules. Then comes the regulations. So in our current act, we have 22 regulations which talk about right from the farm to the fork. So it consists of various food products. It covers the food products, right? It covers the packaging and labeling, and it covers advertisement and claims. So various aspects of the foods are covered under these regulations. So for doing any food business, you need to have the license and the registrations. The conditions of those licensing and registrations are covered under this FSSAI licensing and registration regulation, which was laid down in 2011. Then comes our food products like jam, jellies, milk and milk products, fish and fisheries. So these are all covered under the Food Product Standards and Food Additives Regulation in 2011. So in my next slides, I will be covering like what are the horizontal standards, what are the vertical standards, and during the formula compliances, how you have to check. So this regulation is very important from the regulatory perspective, for the R&D perspective, right? The next is the packaging and labeling regulation, which talks about when food is packed. So what information would go on the pack for the consumer awareness, right? If you're seeking any information, so what information should be there? Any warning statement is there, net paid is there, price is there, if there are any claims and all which the FBO wants to tell to its customer, right? Consumer. So what are the regulations around that? Next is the contaminants, toxins, and residues. So we talk about now the food safety. So apart from the food ingredients and the food additives, so these contaminants, these needs to be controlled. The restriction limits of these contaminants are mentioned in this regulations, like your insecticides, pesticides, the restriction levels of those naturally occurring toxins, antibiotics. So what kind of antibiotics are allowed? What should be their regulatory restriction limits? So all these things are defined in this regulation. So when we will study all these regulations in detail, then you would come to know about these things, more about these things. Next is the laboratory and the sample analysis regulation. So it talks about that how the sample would be collected, where it would be sent, what would be the quantity of the sample. So all these things are mentioned in the laboratory and sample analysis. Next is the regulation about the prohibition and restriction on sales. So what is not allowed to do in India? So that is actually mentioned over here. For example, all salt which is needs to be like sodium chloride, that which is sold in India should be iodized. So that is again given in this regulation. For confectionery also, like they have laid down the regulations. You cannot sell the loose oil, right, in the market. So that is for the consumers specifically. So that is under the prohibition and restriction on sales. Now, apart from the food, they have laid down the separate regulations for the health supplements, nutraceuticals, food for special dietary use, food for special medical purpose, functional food, and novel foods. They have laid down separately the ingredients which are allowed in those foods. What are the differences between these? What kind of claims you can use for these products? So all those regulations are being laid down here. Next is the food recall procedure. So if any crisis situation happens, the food becomes unsafe. So what are the conditions under which the food to be recalled, and what would be the procedure for that? How it would be communicated to the government and to the consumers? So all these things are defined under the food recall procedures. Next is the import regulation. So whenever any food comes into India, so it has to comply to the Indian regulations. The consignment, what kind of document should accompany, the consignment during the import? What are the rectifiable labels? Because the exporting country might be having the different regulations than the importing country. So what kind of rectifiable labeling is there? So that is all mentioned under the import regulations. Next is the approval of the non-specified food and food ingredients. As I said that the food product standards and food additives is there. So there might be, because the R&D keeps on happening, right? And they may come up with such a product that is not mentioned earlier in our FSSAI Act. And it may be a novel food also, right? So what is the procedure to get that kind of food or food additive or ingredient approved, right? So that is mentioned in this regulation. The another is about the organic food. So these days under the COVID-19, everyone says have healthy food, right? So and have the organic foods because that is pesticides free, insecticide free. So what are the criteria? What are the guidelines for such food? That is defined under the organic food regulations. What agencies are certified, accredited for such kind of organic certification? fortification. So that is all defined in the organic food regulations. Next is the alcoholic beverages. So they made a separate regulation for the alcoholic beverages. So previously there were no regulation for these, and recently in 2018 they had gazetted this regulation. Next is the fortification of the foods. We know that malnutrition problem is quite pertinent in India, and they have mandated few nutrients, mandatory to be into the food. For example, vitamin A is mandatory to be added to the vanaspati ghee, right? And similarly, in the fortification of the food, they have come up sometimes a voluntary, sometimes a mandatory fortification of the wheat flour, refined wheat flour, milk and milk products, oil, right? So they have defined that what nutrients can go into this food and up to what level, then only you can call this food fortified, else you cannot say your food is fortified. So all these things are described and covered under these regulations. So next is like when the product is packed, so the business owners, they want to say that our food is the best. They made some claims that it's all natural, it's all sugar free, or we have added certain nutrient which is protein dense or source of protein or source of omega-3 fatty acid, sometimes like blah blah. So all these things are covered under the advertising and claims. So basis this only, if you are meeting those criteria, right? For protein also, protein source, if you just say, so they should have this much quantity of protein into your food per serving, right? Then only you can claim your product is protein rich. So all these things are defined under our advertising and claims. Next is the packaging regulation. So earlier all these advertising and claims, packaging, these were part of the packaging and labeling. But now they have, bifurcated the packaging and labeling regulation into different parts. So one is the advertising and claims, another is the packaging, and going forward, the packaging and labeling regulation would be replaced with the labeling one, right? So the packaging regulation, it talks about like what kind of packaging material could be used and what are the safety parameters that needs to be complied with for the food packaging material. So all that is defined, and they have given the references like for what kind of a food, what kind of the packaging material could be used. So all that is defined under that. What would be the frequency criteria of selecting a packaging material? So that is also there. The next is the food safety auditing. So many auditing agencies, certification bodies are there, right? Like your TUV is there, NSF, Moody International, many are there. So they need some accreditation, right? That they are working in a harmonized and a complied way. So the FSSAI, they made the guidance and they made a regulation for these food safety auditing agencies as well. So if they're hiring any auditor, so what should be the qualification, what should be the experience of the auditor? So all this is laid down under this regulation. The next is a recognition and notification of the laboratories. As I said, so this is all more in detail. So this was enacted again in 2018. So apart from these main regulations, so there are other regulations also, but these are specifically for the administrative part of the FSSAI. The next is the definitions. So the definition for this act, actually they are covered under the chapter 1, section 3, and the terminologies which are defined here, the meanings are applicable to means the scope is applicable to all acts, rules and regulations made there under. So wherever you are reading the word food anywhere in the regulation, so the meaning of this food will apply here, right? Similarly, food safety, so that meaning would be applicable throughout this act, rules and regulations. So for the definition part, I have not covered all the definitions here, but some key definitions which needs to be understood from the R&D and regulatory perspective. So the first definition is food, right? So we all study food. We study different types of the foods. We study food additives. We study ingredients. we study food engineering, but what exactly the food is? According to our FSSAI Act, what is the food? So food is means any substance, whether processed, partially processed, or unprocessed. So what does that mean? Processed means like your bakery products, biscuits, breads, carbonated beverages, which are ready to consume, ready for human consumption. So these all fall under the processed. Partially processed means they are not like for the ready for human consumption, but after giving final processing treatment, they becomes ready for consumption, right? For example, you have the frozen tikkies in the market. It includes those products, just semi-finished kind of a product. So one FBO, for example, manufactures some semi-finished. For example, let's say I'm making a sauce, which is a mixture of the tomato, some spices, and salt and sugar, right? So instead of adding 10 ingredients to the sauce, I made a pre-mix for that. So whenever I make a sauce, I take the tomato pulp and then I add these mixes to that sauce, and it would be ready like with the addition of 2 or 3 ingredients. So that spice mixer, which is the combination of many spices, it would become a partially processed or a semi-processed kind of a. The next is the unprocessed. Unprocessed, which is natural, which is not processed at all. So that is the unprocessed, like your wheat, rice, dals, pulses are there, right? And your fruits and vegetables. So these are unprocessed, which is intended for human consumption. So that is very important. So any substance which is intended for human consumption is the food, which includes primary food to the extent defined in clause ZK. So we will see the definition of the primary food in the next slide. It includes the genetically modified or engineered food or food containing such ingredients. So in Act, the genetically modified or engineered food are defined. With the advancement of the biotechnology, so many are microorganisms being used for the production of the enzymes and all, having a vast application in the food industry. When these microorganisms, sometimes their DNAs are being, altered to produce some ingredients or additives directly, right? So these are called the genetically modified or engineered food or food containing such ingredients. But as per the current regulations, the government do not allow to have the genetically modified food, but they are in the process of making the regulations for such kind of foods because these are very common in EU and US. Next is the infant foods. It's self-explanatory. Packaged drinking water, alcoholic drinks, chewing gum, and any substance, including water, being used during the manufacture, preparation, or treatment. Now, this is what the food is. But what it does not include, now we will study in the next few lines. That is the animal feed, live animals, but unless they are prepared or processed for placing on the market for human consumption. So if it is intended for human consumption, it will fall under the definition of food. But if it is not intended for the human consumption, they will not be considered as a food. Next is the plants prior to harvesting, drugs and medicinal products, cosmetics, narcotic or psychotropic substances. So these are covered under the different regulations under the different department. Now, if the central government, wants to broaden the scope of the food, they wanted to get other food under the category of the food. So they may do so by notification in the official gazette. So this is not under the authority of the FSSAI, right, to broaden the scope of the food. So this is under the scope of the central government only. It may be after the recommendation of the FSSAI or through another technical body. Next is primary food. So we read this terminology in the definition of the food. So Under section 3, subsection 1 ZK, primary food means the article of the food being a produce of agriculture or horticulture or animal husbandry and dairying or aquaculture in its natural form. This natural form is very important. It means the food is unaltered. Nothing, it's very natural. Nothing is being added to it. No processing. So that is called the primary food, which is resulted from the growing, raising, cultivation, picking, harvesting, collection, or catching in a person other than a farmer or a fisherman. So primary food here would be like your wheat, rice, pulses, fruits, vegetables, like as such. So these are all the primary foods. Now the food additives. So we studied food, we studied the primary food. Now what are the food additives? So this is defined under subsection 1K. So till date, like while studying, we learned the definition of these food additives from our books and all. But what our regulation says? It says that any substance not normally consumed as a food, right, by itself or used as a typical ingredient of a food, right? So food additive is like which is not normally consumed as a food, whether it has any nutritive value or not. So it's not necessary that the food additive should have any nutritive value, but it should have some technological purpose in that food. The technological purpose includes the organoleptic also, your flavors, right, your mouthfeel. So these additives could be used in the manufacture, processing, preparation, treatment, packing, packaging, transport, or holding of such food, right? So this could be used at these stages, which could be added directly or indirectly. Directly we all understand, right? So any emulsifier we add it directly to the food to perform some function. But what is indirectly? Which is not being added directly to the food, which is not meant for that food, but it is present in that food. You can understand this within a small example, like in sugar, we have the sulfur dioxide, which has a technical function to do with the sugar. But now that sugar is used for the preparation of jam, where the sulfur dioxide not being added directly, but when the jam would get tested, right? So you may get the traces of the sulfur dioxide, right? So from where the sulfur dioxide is coming? It is coming from the sugar. So that is an indirectly, which entered into the finished product. So that we call generally in our regulatory terms as a carryover principle, right? So in its by the byproducts becoming a component or otherwise affecting the characteristics of such food. But what is not included in the food safety, food additive, is the contaminants or the substance added to the food for maintaining or improving the nutritional qualities, right? So these are out of the scope of the food additives. Next definition is the ingredient. So what is the ingredient? So all these terminologies are interlinked, right? But they have the different meaning according to the regulations. So ingredient means any substance, including a food additive, used in the manufacture or preparation of food and present in the final product, possibly in a modified form. So ingredient is like a broader category, which includes your ingredients also, plus your food additives also, we call them as a ingredients, right? I have taken a small example here, like a chewing gum. So it has sugar, gum base, glucose syrup, modified starch, glycerine, BHA, and colors, right? So in these ingredients, we have the basic ingredients like sugar is there, right? Gum base, Without the gum-based chewing gum can't be made. Glucose syrup. So these are the 3 ingredients which are being used. But rest are the additives which have some technical function to do. So modified starches are being used as an emulsifier, glycerine being used as a humectant, BHA as an antioxidant, and these colors to impart a color to the food. So this must be having the flavors also, right? But flavors we don't mention in the ingredient line for these products. So for flavor declaration, we have the other modes. The next important definition is the food safety, which is mentioned under subsection 1Q. So what do you mean by the food safety? It means the assurance that the food is acceptable for human consumption according to its intended use. So that is the very important, that it is acceptable for human consumption. So it is not necessary if there is a food, ingredients and additives, right? So the food is safe. No. So for the safety of the food, it should be acceptable. So it should be prepared under the hygienic conditions, right? So it should be devoid of the contaminants. The contaminant should not be more than the regulatory restriction limits, right? So various components make the food safe. So how we ensure the food safety? Through the food safety management systems. Means the adoption good manufacturing practices, good hygienic practices, HACCP, which is hazard analysis and critical control points, and such other practices as may be specified by the regulation for the food businesses. So specifically, we have 3 hazards: biological hazards, chemical hazards, and physical hazards. So all this food safety management system is to make sure that our food is free of these hazards. All these hazards are being taken care, being controlled to produce the safe food. Now, we have read about the food safety. We read about the food safety management systems, and the definitions are very small. But now we have the definition for the unsafe food, which is very much elaborated in subsection 1ZZ. So how you can call the unsafe food, right? So it means an article of a food whose nature, substance or quality is so affected as to render it injurious to health. The most important word over here is injurious to health. I just take a small example here. For example, I make a confectionery, a toffee, right? So all the ingredients are compliant to the regulation. All additives are compliant. It is compliant to the contaminants, toxins, and residue also. It is made under the sanitary conditions also, right? The food is safe, but I have given a shape of a pinpointed shape of the confectionery. So when it gets swallowed down, so it may cause injury, right? So by nature, by the physical appearance, if it cause injury to the health, the food will become unsafe, right? So next, like they have elaborated it more, like if the food is having any poisonous or deleterious substances, it would render the food unsafe. If it is having any filthy, putrid, rotten, decomposed or diseased animal substances or vegetable substances, it will render the food unsafe, right? If you have any flies also into your food, right? Or in flavor or any food additive, so that would be considered as an unsafe food. So there are particular limits to that physical hazards also which are defined, right? So if it is prepared under the unhygienic processing conditions, so then again it would make the food unsafe. If any substitution of any inferior or cheaper substance being done, right, in the food, so it would make the food unsafe. Here it comes your adulteration, right? So you might have all studied about the adulteration of the food. The common examples are the papaya seeds into the black pepper, whole black pepper, and in turmeric also some brick powder is added. The most common adulteration happens in the honey, right? So these are covered, means in the definition over here, which makes the food unsafe, and this is penalized, right? Any abstraction, wholly or in part, or any of its constituents. So, for example, they have laid down the standards for the milk, right? And they says that minimum this much of milk fat should be there, and SNF should be this. But any FBO, they are doing it, but they extracted or replaced that milk fat with something else, right? So again, that would make the food unsafe. If any color, flavor, coating, powdering, or polishing is done to conceal the article or to make it appear better, then again this will fall under the definition of the unsafe food. The common examples over here is the fish, which is highly perishable. So the business operators, they do some, coating and all just to make it appear that this is very fresh. So that is all are under the unsafe food practices. Next is if any coloring or preservative being added, right, to the food which is not allowed, so it would make a food unsafe. Here you can understand like this, if any preservative is there which is not permitted in that food, but it is permitted in some another food, right? But the FBO has used that additive where it is not permitted, so he cannot use that because it will make the food unsafe. Though the additive might be safe in other food categories, but since it is not permitted, so it cannot be added, else it would render the food unsafe. Next is any infestation of the food with the worms, weevils, or the insects, right? So it will make the food unsafe. If it is prepared under the insanitary conditions, then also if it is packed, prepared, or even kept or transported, then also the food is unsafe. If it is misbranded or substandard, so misbranded, again it's a very detailed definition which is covered under the regulations. The food containing the extraneous matter, so it makes the food unsafe. By the virtue of containing pesticides and other contaminants in excess of quantities specified by the regulation, so that would render the food unsafe. Next is we have read the terminology misbranded, right? So it's quite interesting. So our regulation says the food could be misbranded under the broadly 3 conditions. So if it is represented, right, or advertised with the false or misleading or deceptive claim, right, it would call as misbranded. So here if the food is misbranded also, it will become unsafe, right? So there the 2 penalties would happen to the business operator. One would be the misbranded food and another would be the unsafe food. So now that would be under the jurisdiction of the court, like how the case would be taken up. Just to understand it, a simple example is a KFC and the OFC, right? So the K is replaced with the O, and someone is fond of KFC by mistake, by the looks and all, and he just went to the OFC and didn't found that kind of quality of the food there. So that would means a good example of the misbranding of the food. So if any article is sold in a package which has been sealed or prepared or by instant or manufacturer or producer. So now we are talking about a packaged food. Now the food is packaged and it carries all the packaging and labeling information, right? But that imitates the another article of a food, then again it would be called as misbranded food. Similarly, so if any of the package carries a statement, design, or a devised regarding the ingredient or substance contained therein, which is false, right? So that would contribute to the misbranding of the food. Now, if the food is having any, coloring or flavoring or chemical preservative, which it carries, but it does not mention on the label of the product, it would fall under the misbranding. Example, in the confectionery, I added strawberry, right? Flavor. So I write on the label as strawberry. Okay. So the consumer may think, oh wow, this confectionery is having the strawberry. So it might be having a strawberry pulp or something like that. But actually the manufacturer had not added any real strawberry. He had added a strawberry flavor, which could be your artificial flavor, natural or nature identical. So the complete information is not given to the consumer. He had hidden that information so that the consumer may buy thinking that this is made up of real strawberry. So then again, it would fall under the purview of the misbranding of the food product. And misbranded food is again the unsafe food. Similarly, if any food is meant for a special dietary purpose, but its label do not carry all mandatory information, this would be under the misbranding, right? So more thorough you go, more examples you have, so better understand you would better understand these regulations. So here I have selected one example of like Cheetos puffs and Cheetos, right? So by pronunciation, this seems to be very similar. So the person who is in a rush just went to the modern market. He just buy these Cheetos thinking that he buy the Cheeto thinking that he is buying a Cheetos, right? So that would fall under a misbranding kind of a case. Now we talk about the definition part is over. So a lot of definitions are given over there, but I have covered a few of them just for the better understanding. And next we will talk about the horizontal and vertical standards. Here we are talking about the basically product related standards. So horizontal standards means which cut across the various foods and categories, means these regulations, these standards are common to all food and food categories, right? Irrespective of their nature. For example, packaging and labeling regulation, right? This is commonly applicable to all. Contaminants, toxins and residues regulations, food recall procedure, import regulations. So these are the horizontal standards which are applicable to all. So whatever material under the food is getting imported into India would be a horizontal standard and it has to comply to the import regulations. Now what are the vertical standards? Vertical standards means mainly include the identity and the compositional standards of the specified food products which cover additives, microbiological requirements, etc. So vertical means specifically we are talking about a particular food. For example, we have the category of the milk and milk analogs. Under that, we have the subcategories of the milk, like milk as such is there. Under the milk, we have the tone milk, double tone milk, full cream milk. Then we have the standards for the cream. We have the standards for cheese. In cheese, we have the different standards for the different types of the cheese, right? Which is very product specific. So these are the vertical standards wherein all physico-chemical properties of that particular food is given. Microbiological requirements, if applicable, are given, right? The food is specifically characterized. So that is the vertical standards. So these are the various vertical standards like food product standards and food additives, which is very important for us. Health supplements, nutraceuticals, food for special dietary use, food for special medical purpose, functional food and novel foods, alcoholic beverages. So these are all the vertical standards. Now come the formula compliances. Right. So if we are given, we have designed one product. So how we ensure that our formulation is compliant to the regulations, right? So in totality, we have 197 product standards. So in the formula compliance, we have two type of things. One is the product standard and another is the additive standards, right? So in the product standards, we have 197 and these are mainly categorized into these categories like dairy products and analogs, fats, oils, and fat emulsions, where margarine, bakery fat, all these are covered over here. Then fruit and vegetable products. There's a big list of these products like your sauces, tomato ketchups, pickles, everything like related to the fruits and vegetables is here. Frozen vegetables, right? Cereal and cereal products, where we talk about your primary food as well as your bakery foods as well. Meat and meat products, fish and fish products, sweets and confectionery, sweetening agents like your sugar. That is also, standardized in our regulations, including the honey. Salt, spices, condiments, and related products are there. Beverages other than the dairy, fruits and vegetable base. So what are covered under these beverages here? The carbonated beverages, non-carbonated beverages, right? Which is with the addition of your water, sugar, or dietetic counterparts of the sugars or flavors, right? Then other food products and ingredients, proprietary food. I would be covering the proprietary food separately. Then radiation processing of the food and gluten-free food. So as I said that we have the additive standard separately. So till date we have 22 additives being standardized in our regulations, and this is an ongoing exercise because there are many additives, and slowly we would be having a big list of the additive standards also here. Now we have the appendix A, right, where the food categorization system is there. So in the vertical standards, we have a different categories, but that corresponds to a food categorization system, which is internationally harmonized with the codex, right? So in appendix A, all food additives which are permitted in a particular food are being defined with their restriction levels. And then we have the consideration of the carryover principle in the prepared food. Yes, so prepared food like pizzas are everyone's favorite, right? But pizza, you will not find any standard for the pizzas. But pizzas is basically composed of what? It's composed of cheese, vegetables, sauces, and the bread. So these ingredients are having the standards being laid down. So if all these ingredients are complying to that standards, respective standards, so when the pizza would be made, so it would be automatically comply to these regulations. So apart from these vertical standards, it has to comply to the safety standards like your contaminants. Hello? Hi, Mama.
Tripta, we have to stick to the schedule.
So the next is formula compliances, right? So I'm just taking you to a regulation that how it looks like. I'm just taking a small example of the lozenges, like which is made up of the artificial sweeteners like here you can see the polyol sorbitol, lubricant magnesium salts of stearic acids, and sweetener sucrose, right? So how we can check the compliances now? So for lozenges, we have the regulation vertical standard, which is under 2.7.2. So here you can see the vertical standard of the lozenges, like what ingredients are being permitted over here, right? And these should strictly comply to these physicochemical properties like sucrose content, sulfated ash, and acid insoluble ash. But our product is like sugar free. So this sucrose content will not be applicable to my product. Now what comes? The additives. So what additives and at what levels I can use, that I need to check. So here my lozenges don't have a separate category. It is covered under the hard candy. So here if you just see that confectionery is the main category, and then we have the subcategories 5.1 and 5.2, and on these subcategories we have subcategories. So the additives which are permissible under the confectionery would be automatically applicable to the subcategories and subcategories. Here you can just see the hard candy. The lozenges are being defined over here. See. And this is the list of the additives which is permitted to be used in the lozenges. For example, sucralose I had added. So this has the INS number of 955 and I cannot use more than 1500 ppm of this sucralose in my product, right? So this is how, like, we check the compliances of our products. Again, if some microbiological requirements are there, then we have to go to the Appendix B. Proprietary food means the foods which are not being standardized in our regulations. So these are the proprietary food, but we have to find a nearest product standard to those foods. For example, I made a chewing gum made of the hard candy and the chewing gum. So this combined product would be called as a proprietary product. So this is all about for today's session. Thank you very much. Over to Nirupma.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Rapta. I hope our students might have enjoyed. The participants must have benefited out of your presentation. It was really elaborative and very educative. In fact, you've already highlighted the importance of World Food Safety Day and what is the theme for this year. Then the FSSAI Act that elaboratively you have covered. Then the recent approaches that FSSAI has come up, like COVID guidelines that they have released for various, food processing manufacturers, and they're all manufacturers are complying with that. So thank you very much to all the participants. It was really elaborative. I would now request if there is any question. I don't see any question except that tobacco is a food or not.
Tobacco actually is not a, it is actually defined under the regulations, and if it complies to that, then it would become a food. If it complies to those requirements, yeah.
So that's a minor, minor line between the food and non-food complying to the standards. Okay, fine. So fair enough. As of now, it stands over, and I would request all attendees to go through all the series, and the e-certificates will be provided only to those who will be completing the web series. For the next series, we'll be announcing the date soon. So at present, at present, I would request if there is any question left, you can mail us and we'll be answering you. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Wait for the next date updates. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.